Hello and welcome back to the Homemade Haven. In today's video, I want to walk you guys through how easy and simple it is to start your own sourdough starter at home with just 2 ingredients. Though you can buy already active starters from Etsy or your local farmer's market, making your own starter at home is so easy and so simple. It will save you a lot of money, and having the skill of starting one from scratch is invaluable. So super easy to get started. All you need is some flour, and you start with 1/4 cup or so. It doesn't have to be exact. And then you use about the same amount of purified water. You want to mix your flour and water to almost like a pancake batter consistency. And then you want to put some kind of like cheesecloth or a tea towel, something that's very breathable but will cover your sourdough starter to keep it safe from pests and hairs and dust and things like that. And then you want to store it at room temperature. You'll want to choose some kind of glass reservoir for putting your sourdough starter into. I always like a glass jar, or you can use plastic if you like. I would not use things like metal or wood, and the same goes for your utensils. I like to use either a plastic or some kind of coated wooden spoon so that the dough doesn't stick to the spoon or the stirrer or whatever you end up using. And then we're going to do the same exact thing again. We're just going to add our flour and our water in the same amount and stir it up really well. Then we're going to cover it and leave it overnight. On the morning of day 2, we are going to start discarding some of our sourdough. We're going to discard half of the volume that we have in our jar. The reason that we want to start discarding some of our starter is because as the bacteria is starting to grow inside of our culture here, we need to make room for fresh feed so that the bacteria has something else to eat on and will continue to grow. If you don't discard some of your starter, then you're going to have an enormous amount of sourdough starter in your jar or whatever vessel you decide to keep it in. You always need to double the amount of starter that is in your jar. So if you have about 1/2 cup of starter in your jar, you need to feed it with about 1/2 cup of starter. Now we started with 1/4 cup, so we're feeding 1/4 cups and we're discarding 1/4 cups. The older that your starter gets, the hungrier it will become, and you'll start to notice how quickly it is eating the new flour that you are adding into the jar. So on day 2 in the evening, you'll already notice some of the liquid that is on my sourdough. This is what's called hooch. It's the leftover of what was consumed by the sourdough, and you can just gently pour that down the drain of your sink. You don't want to pour your sourdough starter down the sink because you can clog the drains. We're going to continue the same trend of discarding and feeding twice a day for the next several days in a row. I didn't film all of the days in between because it was kind of redundant. It's the same regimen. You're going to discard and feed morning and evening for about a week or so until you start to notice your starter doubling in size, which I'll show you here in just a minute. But I wanted to include a fun and delicious discard recipe because all of that discard dough is still very valuable, and you can find all kinds of recipes online for what to do with your discard. This morning I made some discard pancakes. I will put the full recipe in the description box below. So you can make these at home if you want to, which I would highly recommend because they are delicious. Now with discard recipes, you don't have to let the dough sit for any period of time. The longer that you can let it sit, the more that batter or dough will start to ferment or sour, but it's totally not necessary for discard recipes. Now when you get to full sourdough recipes, there is an incubation period, but for today, for the discard recipes, that is not necessary. As I mentioned before, I will put the direct link to the recipe that I followed here in this video in the description box below. But for 8 pancakes, I used about 2 cups of all-purpose flour that were spooned and leveled off, and I used 1 cup of my sourdough discard. A little bit more or less is okay, just depending on what you have, but usually by about day 4 or 5 you should have a good solid cup of discard. And then you'll need 1 teaspoon baking soda, 2 teaspoons baking powder, 3 tablespoons of sugar, about 1 3/4 cups of milk. I use some almond milk because that's usually what we have on hand. 2 large eggs, 2 tablespoons of oil. I used butter because that is our favorite, and 1 teaspoon of salt. And I just combined all of the dry ingredients together, mixed them really well, and then I mixed the wet ingredients together and then combined them all into the batter and mixed them really good till there was no like flour chunks left in there. And then I covered my bowl with some saran wrap and I let it rest because I had some chores to do that morning. And like I said, you don't have to let your discard recipes sit for any amount of time, but the longer that your discard can sit, the more it can ferment and break down the flour that's in the rest of your recipe. So I let ours sit for about 2 hours until I was done with chores and ready to cook them for us for breakfast. You can see as the days go on, my starter is beginning to form some bubbles and have some air pockets, and you can just tell the consistency of the starter changes from the very beginning, being more like a paste to becoming more of an airy, fluffy foam almost. If it helps you to keep track of how much your starter is rising, you can make a line on your jar or bowl with a marker, or you can use a rubber band like I used to kind of keep track of how much your starter is growing after you feed it. Because once it is doubling in size by the end of the day, then it's ready to start using for full sourdough recipes. Everybody's starter is going to react a little bit differently according to the amount of yeast that is in your household, how warm your house is, how cold your house is. So your sourdough starter may be ready to bake bread within just a couple of days, or it might take 2 or 3 weeks before it's good and strong and ready to make a good solid loaf of bread with. I hope that this video was helpful for you and encourages you to start your own sourdough starter at home. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe and check back to see how to use your sourdough starter when it is fully activated. And until the next time, I'll see you on the next video. Thanks so much for watching.